And welcome back. So today we're going to look at the technique of using gesture and action to do compositional study. So this is a wonderful technique for looking at very complex analyses or analysis of great master paintings from really any era of art history and reducing them down to very quick understandable compositional structural components. So I'm going to show you about 10 or so. I think that will be a good way to explain that for my students. And I'm going to show you how this particular methodology is not only good for, let's say, number one, analysis, but also for creation and a formation of your own ideas in relationship to making larger scale work or drawing in paintings, but getting down the overall very abstract, very simple basic structure of the complexity that which you ultimately want to create. So we'll start out with this image here on the left by El Greco, and it's a relatively complex design. So let's look first at the overall total effect, the overall way the form of the painting is put together, and then we'll kind of pick apart some of the different complexity of the figure. So the first thing to look at the way it's put together is its overall directional flow, and I might start to draw it this way. As we move in through our eye direction here, we know that the focal point is the image of Christ here in the middle, but we move through this flow up through this way, and we tend to come in and through this kind of flow in this general direction tend to move and flow and cascade to the figure of Christ or Jesus. Is going to be roughly right in through here. So again, this whole idea is to use gesture very simply, very loosely, very abstractly, and keep all detail really, for the most part, out a good deal out of our overall design picture. This is about the simplicity or the totality of the composition, the design, and ultimately which will wind up being your aesthetic or the beauty or the way the image looks. So we move in through this direction, coming in through here. We pass through the image of Christ. The hand tends to move us, the arm direction from lower left up to the right tends to move us in that direction too as we move up. This darker shadow tends to move in that direction. And then we see this grouping or this clumping of these heads in this direction, which moves us up in through this area. And then notice how the head of the figure, in dark, is a little bit lower than the figure of Christ, but El Greco crops this figure off and then uses the sweep of the arm to get us down and back to the flow of the composition, and then back up to the string or the brace that he's holding Christ's hands on, something like handcuffs, if you will. So there's this flow and movement this way and back around, and we get a counter in through here, and I'll work on the scale of this in a little bit in a moment, which is still a little less important than ultimately the overall design and flow of the composition. So Christ is very much stable in through here, comes down. We get him cropped out pretty strongly in through here, cropped out with the other soldier, self-portrait, could be of El Greco in through here, but certainly of a soldier, Roman soldier. And so we'll start to kind of flesh in the head where that lays in as well. So this technique again is no different than when you're starting to sketch in a figure. You're just getting your placement of your forms, but we notice that overall central flow, this sweep through and around with Christ in the middle, really, of this composition, which many times you've probably heard instructors or professors or teachers tell you it's a no-no to put things in the middle. Not necessarily. If we can get movement around and through. So we're always coming back to the idea of Christ in the middle, and even this kind of cloudscape in the background, this sort of outline of cloud forms in El Greco's way tends to emphasize the same kind of balance of composition. And so let's go ahead and flesh this out a little further. We can already step back and look and see the total effect of the flow, what El Greco was thinking in terms of his overall essential design. Was Christ in the middle as a stabilizing sort of triangular device here, and then the other figures in the composition would be secondary, and they would flow around through Christ, up around, and come back down through and overlap his body and come back to the secondary figures here. So there's kind of this sweep in the movement, with Christ being kind of the dominant triangle in the middle, and then of course we have this figure will indicate his head in through here. So if we go back, we can tighten this up a little bit and just keep it very loose and very sketchy. We'll start with the image of Christ's head in through here, and being very careful not to get into any kind of real strong detail. But we want to get the overall simple effect of the design. What is the design? What is the expression in the totality of our composition as expressed by the painting? And as we analyze, and not copy, but analyze what El Greco is doing in terms of his overall indication of forms, and where his lighting is used to effectively indicate dominance or the focal point of the composition, which is certainly into the figure of Christ here as well. So he's surrounded by darker hair. He's well lit from the right side here of the composition, which really starts to affect the contrast of his form given this background tone here, right? So we've got that. El Greco really pushes that, so we get the ultimate light here in the middle, and then the left side of his cloak is certainly in strong light, as well as the right side is pushed in shadow. So we can sort of kind of indicate that without getting too detailed, in keeping it really loose and abstract and flowy. Don't worry about too much about scale and proportion at this stage. You're always looking and willing to take on that, but we also want to make sure that I'm going to cut this composition off about right there. My picture plane device, maybe about right in through there. Don't be afraid to adjust as you need as you're analyzing. So we can go forward. We'll pull down his cloak in through here, and even these folds, what I'm drawing here, gets us this movement down and then up again to the figure of Christ. We'll get his hand across his chest, down and up again, the shapes of these shadows. And then I'll start again with the head here, over here on the left side of Christ. A little bit lower than, notice the head's a little bit lower, a little bit smaller than the image of Christ to give the focal point its dominance, which is certainly not lost on us here. So we have this figure coming down. He's also a little bit smaller than, he gets slightly overlapped by the image of Christ. We'll bring down his armor just a little bit here. Very loose, very gestural, very quick, and we'll just place our compositional figures in our analysis just a little bit slightly more concrete. This is not meant to be a finish, but an analysis of that which is being composed. So you can take a sketchbook. I'm doing this on the Intuos Wacom tablet, of course. And we'll get into more traditional material starting in June and July of this coming year. So about 2, 3, or 4 more months from now. It's getting into springtime. And to give you that feeling. But you can take your sketchbook into museums. A very little small sketchbook is great, and it's very discreet, and people can see the paintings as you're trying to study and analyze as a student. So that's another great thing about doing this. And good, we get this sweep coming in through here, around through the head of Christ. I'll put the other figure in through here. He's a little bit even smaller than, and his tones are muted to calm the contrast down here and to make the ultimate contrast strongest right here on Christ's face and through there. Maybe I can erase that out so you can see that. Let's go back and do that just a little bit. We'll just take it out, and yeah, there we go. You can see that a little bit better. So the strongest contrast, again, is the focal point of the head, and through here the nose, and just an indication of all the other parts. Not important to get much detail in through here. Then we'll go back and we'll feel these cloud forms coming through. And in these heads we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figures, and they're all overlapped and they're clogged together, and they're gawking at the image of Christ. So we'll just indicate these how he did by ovals, and through here, figure in through here. Then another oval, this figure overlapping through here. Then the other small one in through here. They tend to make a big sweeping curve. So you can see them individually, and I encourage you to do so, but I also encourage you to see them more importantly, much more importantly actually, as a grouping or a collective whole, because they act as a return device coming from the right side of the composition, and they help us return our focus back to the image of Christ. So the last head is about right in through here. Okay. Don't worry about messing up. I had to change mine here. It's okay. It's fine. Get the analysis of your composition. That's what we're looking for. So we've got the arm, which is really important here. We bring this green cloak down in through here, and what's really important about this return, so we have this sweep coming through here. What's really important, again, is this arm coming over Christ's arm, the hand ending about right in through here, and that's by design. And that's something I want you to start to understand, that these compositions are creatively thought out beforehand, and then by dozens, if not tens of dozens of these little small studies. And they could be just as simple as this one. For quite a bit of time, they can be simple scribbles to scribble out the vision of what an artist wanted, Greco, Rubens, Velazquez, whomever. So we return here with the hand, and then that final movement of this little band to grab the hand is important to get us back up. So this composition has a secondary return here. So if I change the color a little bit, let's see, let's go to here, and let's revisit this movement. We are, again, coming in through here, moving through to the head of Christ. This is our number one, right, our focal point. Then we move through these figures. Afterward, coming back down, they are pushed in some shadow, and then we return back to the image of Christ here. We could continue our eye movement back in this strong compositional device and through here, or we can come back down and revisit or visit for the first time the suit the armor of the soldier in through here, and then come back and then revisit the entire thing. So the point of this is to, when you're analyzing composition, is to look at it as an analysis, but also analyze and think through the creative formation of composition and design. I should put design up through here in your analyses of master copies, is to look how they very simply figured out how they wanted their placement of forms and figures. So moving up, 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 here's the apex, and it's the most strongly lit, even though this is a strong grouping, right? And we see that, but philosophically, they are less important to the want and attention of our audience in through here. So this area of our composition right in through here is got the most contrast overall, and it's also, you notice it's directly in the center of the composition. If you split it into 4 groups, right, you have this and this. It's right in the borders of the 4 areas of that composition, which really is not done that often and can be very tricky, quite tricky to do. So I think that's something also that's to be analyzed and looked like. Now, you could leave this study like this, or if you wanted to take more time and say, okay, I want to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or another hour just kind of rendering out the value pattern of this, you could do that. And so if I did just a little bit more, I might start to just think very, very simply in terms of shadow tones where things are flowing to. But again, this particular lesson is about the overall design and composition. Of course, value and light and darkness can and always really do have a place within the tonal design of your drawing. So this area down here to the bottom left is very dark. It is also very much non-detailed. So the detail is in the light areas of the composition of El Greco's design. So if we come back in here and if I open up his hand a little further in through here, you see that. So you get the idea in through there. I don't want to erase too heavy. I'll take it beyond white, but I think you get the idea. So there's our first one with El Greco, as we're understanding again this flow and movement of design and how he organizes the principles, elements and principles of art design through composition. All right, so let's take another journey to a different composition. So we'll take a look at Velazquez. So this is, Velazquez, probably his most famous painting, his most famous composition, which certainly would be the Las Meninas composition. So let's take a long look at Las Meninas coming through. So there's another thing that we can look at here is also architecture, but that we're going to have to deal with. But I think first let's take on the effect of just his overall placement of figures and see how that works together. So we look at this icon of Western art as a portrait of many people, self-portrait of the princess, of the king and queen, right? A self-portrait of Velazquez here. A portrait, not a self-portrait of the princess, but a portrait of the princess, self-portrait of Velazquez. A portrait of the attendants around her, the Las Meninas, the religious attendants in through here, possibly a priest, and we see back here in this mirror that the viewers of the composition become the actual king and queen, which become us too as well. So they're reflected in the mirror. So there are many levels of portraiture that are going on in this particular image. So if we look at just the basic underneath kind of flow of where the figures are, we have Velazquez emerging right in here a little bit. And then we sweep down, so one in through here. And of course, we're taking a Western reading of composition. So I'm starting also left to right, which is very important. And then we sweep down and we see the second attendant, or the first one of the first major attendants right in through here in her area where she fits through in through here. And then the princess herself sweeps downward, very much in the center, lower, down right in through here. So here she is in this direction, very quick, very gestural with her bell-like corset and her dress and through this area. Then we come around, we sweep back up in our design through here. And of course, we're going to go back over and through this way and around. So Velazquez takes us on a journey, probably starting in the middle, and we curve up through to him, or we can curve up this way and downward over. As the next attendant is through here, she will be flowing through here. I think it's very important to understand that you want to keep these very loose, very quick, and very much a record of your analysis. Of course, we have the little dog down in through this area of the composition. My picture plane's a little bit lower, so I'll cut it off about right through here, looks like. A little bit further in through there. Then we have the last attendant, or one of the last attendants in through here. Very important attendant in this painting. Very important servant, the dwarf servant through here, as dwarfs played a major emotional role in the court of Philip IV and the Queen, and then the other attendant coming through in through here. All right, so we have that. And then we lose a little bit of our compositional direction. I'm going to pick something up to show you a couple of things that are happening. So we have this large painting that Velazquez is working on, and we can probably assume then that this painting is perhaps a portrait of the king and queen solely. If they are standing in where we are, or it's a portrait of somebody else or a painting. We don't know exactly because it's hidden. So there's many different levels and reads that are going on in this particular painting, but we know Velazquez is starting to emerge about right in through here, and it was one of his later paintings because he has the cross of the Order of Santiago on his chest, and through there it's a nice little tidbit and through there. So we're just getting a feel. Look how, see, we're groping and feeling through all these compositional arrangements. So this is laying in through here. Then these two other look like religious attendants, a priest or priestess, or excuse me, a nun, back in through here, since they were Catholic. And so then I think it's a time to take in a measure of the architecture. So I look for the back corner of the room. It's a one-point perspective room. And here is the end of the wall, the ceiling to the back wall, right in through here. And then we see from the right wall as it converges down somewhat to the corner of the back wall and through here. So we get a good feel of that beginning spatial depth that Velazquez wanted in through here. So that's major flow. So this flow to here, then perhaps down to the dog. It's not without mistake that the dog, the pet mascot, as at an angle to push us, move us back in this direction. And you notice that there's this slight angle of the painting to get us back. Here's the shadow to get us back in through here and up and over. So we'll put on a little bit more of just some architectural details here, and then we can say what's the most important part emerging over and through here would be the opening of the door up to another spatial dimension that goes on in this painting that leads us into a stairwell with a figure that we don't necessarily know who that is, but a figure emerging somewhere in through here, and that silhouette of that figure, which I'll take care of in a little bit, emerges through there. And then of course we have the famous mirror here of, and I'm not worried about completely about scale, getting this all all perfectly worked out. That would come late in a later study. But we're analyzing how he put this image together, how he thought about space and design. It's very spatially at a vanguard for any time, but especially in the Baroque 16th, 17th century of Western art. So the king and queen are here, and then of course we have this salon room, this holding room or waiting room, entertaining room, if you will, where many major paintings, probably many Velazquez's and many Rubens and other French paintings were housed in this colossal room of major Habsburg significance, right? So we have that, and then of course we have these two ornaments, ceiling ornaments for whatever lights are hanging, for hanging lights or candles later on. All right, so we have a very rough layout of our composition spatially, and again we went in this direction, in and around, through, over, down. We come back up through the painting and then over and fill the space in through here. Then because it's so darkened through here, we tend to lose a little bit of the figures, but of course these are secondary and tertiary reads. So when I'm looking at and I'm teaching composition, number one is always the focal point. It's kind of like your home base. In baseball, you have home plate, you have first base, right? You have second base, then you have third base, and you have home. Home is where you always come back to. We will always come back to the princess, right? We'll always come back to her, and these will be around her. Velazquez is secondary or tertiary. So number two is something we come back to. It's second in importance, in third, in fourth read, and so on. They become the secondary, tertiary reads, but we always come back to what's most important, which is the focal point. So now let's take a little time and we'll stay loose. Let's stay really loose and free and sketchy, and let's tighten this composition up just a little bit. Let's keep it relatively simple and to shape and space. Let's go for more opacity here. You can see this. So we have her little head in through here. An adorable painting of a portrait of royalty, probably the greatest royal portrait ever painted. Of not only part of the entire royal family. So we get the daughter, right, and then we get the king and queen and the important religious attendants, and then we also get the creator. The brilliant creator of the composition and the painting itself, which was certainly Velazquez. So if you've never seen this painting live, it's large. It's about 8 feet, 6 to 8 feet across by 6 to 8 feet wide, and it is. I've gotten to see it in 2 visits to Spain, and it's absolutely brilliant. So anytime I'm starting to tighten up a composition, I start to build around the focal point too. That's something else. It holds, the focal point is the emphasis of your total effect and of your design. And so you will probably, more than likely, generally start there in terms of its overall drawing and understanding. And you'll work on that probably the most. I tell my students you'll probably spend more time on the focal point than anywhere else. So we're getting a feeling of the space here, so I'm going to move over to this next attendant, and I just get a feel, I kind of measure over where her head will be, an oval, and through here. And it's all about symbols now, symbols in space. We're not looking for any kind of telltale detail. Getting her dress in through here, seeing how he crops part of her off by this painting over and through here. We have her corset right through here. There seems to be quite a bit of darkness in through, really to hold. I'll put a little rendering in through here because it's really important. Again, he uses like the last El Greco painting we looked at. Look at all the strong light and dark right here in that middle section, which is really important. So they're relatively here horizontal as we move across, And then I'll come back up to Velazquez peeking over. Now I'll tighten up where his position can be, which can be a little lower through here, leaning slightly into the composition this way. Majority of him is cropped out, so he's secondary with his paintbrush and his palette. So we get some insight into perhaps how he painted for the day with a small palette, traditional kind of palette and brush. And then we see the large-scale portrait that he's working on. We assume it's a portrait. It could be a historical painting. And through here, so we'll put some of the braces of the paintings, and this really hasn't changed in 600 years, 600 years, how that works out. Of course, this is stabilized, this wood here. So we get that. And again, of course, Velazquez influenced by this painting Picasso, who did numerous cubist-like expressive studies, and of course Dali and a host of generations of other artists. So I'm going to tighten up or just indicate through black where these background areas are. And I'm taking not really special care in terms of their rendering. It's just a action gesture sketch for design and analysis of how this artist put this painting together. Don't worry if you make something a little longer or slightly bigger. It's not necessarily the point. I know this rectangle of that painting is a little bit longer than it needs to be, which is fine. It's okay. How did we put this together? So this figure back here is sort of hovering over in total silhouette. It's kind of a triangle like this, and then we have part of the arm cuff and in the hand like that. Of course, we have stairs where that person is coming up or coming down. And then next is the attendant as she breaks that darkness in through here. So we see her sort of triangular profile in through here, right? And she reaches down to begin to help do whatever is necessary for the princess to be comfortable. Come down, and we have the long, fresh, beautiful belt, the curves of these corsets, the dresses of the time. And this was all in shadow for the most part, except for her face through here. And so the more you do of this, the more you retread. It's an active way also to look at art history. So it's very, I'm going to write here, active. So it's actively looking at art history. And that's something that I can't stress more for art students of any particular stylistic concern. Whether you're working in a process way, or you are working in an abstract way, or a highly conceptual way where you're not really making an image at all, your understanding of art history will feed your practice. And I highly recommend that you continue to be consistent in looking at the art historical antecedents that came before us and how they affect what's going on now. So I'll give a little indication to this back wall, and then I'll start to wrap this up. We have the dwarf attendant here. She's beautifully painted. One of my favorite figures in the composition. She's a beautiful character. Through here, and just kind of indicate her in through here. And then the other little girl attendant in through here. She comes through. Just want to indicate the position in design. And of course, we can't forget the sleepy dog in through here, the wonderful pet. In through here as we wrap this up a little bit. Through there, and the foot, and then the hands and feet and through there. And of course, this was coming through the design. So again, the overall effect was the flow and how Velazquez centers the composition, gives us a portrait that is not only of the king and queen, but of their daughter and also of Velazquez too as well. So it's a multiple portrait with multiple points of view and a very challenging and engaging spatial effect that was first balanced out by this bottom center location and then kind of a curvature this way curved through, and then we really noticed the kind of minimal architecture to help us through the composition. Alright, so let's move on to our next study. Let's see what we have waiting for us. So here we have Rembrandt. So let's pull this into full screen. A little bit easier composition, thankfully, than what we just analyzed before. So let's change color and let's look at what Rembrandt's doing for us here in terms of his overall abstract design. So that's the first thing I'll look for. I'll look for the abstraction first, then I'll look for the space second, and the design, the creation of all that third and tertiary. So let's find our initial reads. So what I see first is, take the opacity off this, is this flow of interaction between the two of them here and here. So, you know, which one is the focal point? They really all both take on a kind of central focal point up and through here, right? So we see that. She tends to be a little bit more dominant, so she's higher. So I kind of see them as this shape overall fitting into the composition. So they tend to take up this kind of look and view, this sort of oblong kind of rectangle in here, right, if you will. It takes some imaginative jumping to get through there. I understand that for sure. So they're filling up this space with peripheral dark, you know, around them. And then again, her arm curve is very important to get us through the composition this way. See how it balances or parallels or gives expression to this curve in through here. And then we turn and come back through the figure, this other figure this way, and then back up into him. He pulls his arm up in an expression this way and back. So we're looking down on, she's looking down on, so everything is moving in this direction, right? And then all of a sudden we get back to him and he leans off of her, away from her a little bit. So we're always being forced down. And then what pulls us back a little bit, gives some balance, is this arm elbow, right, coming up and then poking back up where he's in some kind of prayer. So down, 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 up and around and through here where his feet are, where she disappears in darkness, where there's a lamb here that looks like there's a little dog down and through there. So they pull us down, back up, and then back around. And so that makes this kind of, if I had to make it as simple as I could think of it, this composition is a sort of tilted rectangle like so. All right, so let's go back now and play off that design. So you can start it that way if you want, and you can say, okay, let's play off that a little bit, and now let's go back and make this a little bit more visual, besides just kind of a diagram a little bit and take a look. So now we see the head in through here, so we'll map her head in, taking great pains not to be in any kind of detail. As a matter of fact, we're in a rush. We're in a rush to analyze it. See the big picture. See all of the parts that make the composition what it is in the biggest picture, not to get detailed in the eye highlights of the lamb or the old lady. That's not important at all. See the big picture parts. So we have her, and she's really kind of taller than life, it feels like, in this composition. She's really large, really big. So here she leans over, and then he kind of, because of this reproduction, she really gets lost in all these shadows right in through here. And so we get a little lost into there, so we can put her in this shadow and see how he curves. He continues to curve us through here, The shadow is curved. I'm going to make it darker in through here. Her arm comes around and gives us this curve in through here. And of course we have the little lamb, sacrificial lamb, if you will. And this little arm of the lamb and the hoof come out, something like that. So we get curved around. All this is simple in dark. And then we'll take on the male figure and see how he's far greater pushed down. So most of his head starts underneath where hers would be, about right in through here. So she's very dominant, where he's very, at this composition, secondary. So he looks slightly forlorn and away from her, as we've got the beard coming out and through here. Keep it very simple. And of course, as we start to analyze the position of his body, put position this way. And so his knees are about right here. The cloth comes down and through this area. Foot kind of comes out in this direction, other foot out in this direction, right, and through here. Falls in underneath. So there's this great sort of counterbalance to this, right? So we have, or can I put this? This movement back up against this movement as they counterbalance together. So this is very important in this particular painting, to have this movement of elbow and arm to bring this composition into some kind of balance. And so we bring the folds down of the cloth through here, up and around. It's cropped out nicely and beautifully through here. And then the chair is on a slight perspective, so everything, the end of the chair is here, right? And the other end of the chair is pushed down and over in two-point perspective, so we get this kind of movement, this direction. Or if we come back, we can say it's this. So he flows this way, and then he flows us back in through that direction. And then lastly, we'll give a little bit of architecture, the window opening in through here. And the tonality of this, let me go bigger. I can fill this up pretty quick. The tonality of this painting is such that he really forces the action where it should be on the most important parts, and he emphasizes that movement. So we have here, right, and all this is pretty much detailless, or detailed less, lacking detail. That's a better way of speaking English. It lacks detail because we want all the action to be on the two figures. So all this becomes buried in tone, composition, right, and through here. And then we'll end this up in through here. And here we have our next analysis there of Rembrandt's beautiful painting, beautiful sweep in through there. So keep it loose, keep it simple. You can use tone to help you in your composition, but you want, again, the idea of simplicity and overall seeing the effect of design is what we're after. Okay, let's do another and see what treat we have next for us. So you can, again, you can take your sketchbook into the National Gallery of Art in London, for instance, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, for instance, or to the Prada in Madrid, or to the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, on and on, right? And or to the wonderful Louvre in Paris, to help you analyze and spend hours with these little compositional studies. I want to really get you to understand today's lesson is not about the slick, beautiful finish of a drawing. We're going to get there. We're going to spend years with videos getting there. But today is about the nuts and bolts of it. About getting down to the putting together of the design. So let's analyze now this composition by Sir Joshua Reynolds English painter. Let's take a look and I'll show you something else. What you notice is this grouping in the middle of the composition here with the apex of the mother's head, which is very important. What I notice too is, do you see that they are all a kind of a pyramid shape in this direction going down the backside too as well? And so her lean here of her cloth, her knees are roughly in this direction. Her head is going to be roughly here. And so she really holds the balance of the composition. And of course she's moving a little bit in this direction. So we move up to her head as the top apex. And notice this beautiful sweep of these curtains. See how dark they are around her head and the head of the child to the right there. That's for strong effect. They're very light, they're very pale, they're very alabaster against some of these rich, darker brown and sepia or sanguine, red tones in the composition. So that's the dominant compositional force, is that triangular rectangle. And then of course what the audience will see right after that will be the charming quality of the children adorning the portrait with their mother. Of course, she's at the top of the composition. Her head is highest, with the children's head below hers for dominance. They are her children, so they will take a secondary role in this case, and so we'll lay in the head. So a lot of times with these compositional studies, I will look, once I get the overall compositional pattern, I will look to the placement of the heads, especially as a strong device. Like I've got the 3 heads located, but then of course there's one more down here, and so I'll locate the toddler, or the youngest, the infant, of the composition as the 4th, and they're placed in this sort of ring, a ring around her head, or her head being part of that ring, where they're the trifecta of another triangle here, and where she's in the top apex. So it's no mistake. This is well crafted design. This is not spontaneous kind of painting that we might see in the 20th and 21st century. This is very planned compositional structure, where he puts her head at the top of this movement of the other heads of the children to signify again her dominance and her reign, in her love for her children, and her children adorn around her in a loving, very comfortable, kind of aristocratic, if you will, embrace. All right, so now, once I've started to hopefully show you the design and the creation and the building of this composition, so we'll open up here and we get to some very deep space out in through this opening of the curtain. He leaves this opening nice as a flow device of landscape, if you will, with the pillar. And then we have what is probably the 4th child, which is the bird, whatever type of bird. It's not a parakeet. It's not quite sure. Not a parrot, maybe, something like that. Somebody will know out there. But you get the idea. So that bird starts to show up in through here, but turned away as a secondary device. All right, so let's now tighten this up a little bit and we'll show ourselves. You can draw. Hopefully you're drawing along with me. But once you get the idea, you can start to take off in your own. And I would use the Web Gallery of Art website I've shown in other videos. That is just an amazing encyclopedia of late Gothic era painting and drawing, all the way to really Impressionism. It stops at Romanticism, so you won't get Monet and Manet, etc., but you will get Greco, and you will get Delacroix, etc. But it is an encyclopedic volume of free and usable images to do master studies from. So it is amazing. Okay, so now as we move through and go a little faster, let's again keep our compositions still simple as we sort of solidify the shapes and the overall pattern of what Joshua Reynolds here is trying to do, again with that triangular stability in the forefront of the composition. Who knows how long it took him to really hit on the look and the feel and the placement of these forms. So these artists that we're analyzing might do tens, dozens, I don't know about hundreds, but certainly many different analyses of where they wanted a form. They wouldn't have figures in front of them or models in front of them. They would just be drawing, probably at many times even much more rougher than I am. It could be just lines and scribbles. Rubens was notoriously famous for starting ideas with unintelligible scribbles for his audience, and until he tightened things up, until he got confident. And that's another idea, the getting the confidence of where you want to place your form. So this is about the exploring and using gesture and simple design of action to give a strong indication of what you want to begin to try to express in your painting. So we'll get the major components of these figures, her dress in through here. And if you want, I'll put some tone down later on once we've got everything locked in line. And of course, you could do it in tone on its own. I mean, there are many different ways to do this. You know, I'm using the Wacom tablet because we're waiting on our grant to come in June, and we'll really be opening up all kinds of different materials then. But you can do this in an array of both drawing and painting, and really, if you want, sculptural kind of clay if you wanted to. So let's just get the baby's head kind of squared in a little bit stronger, the little oval in through here, the back coming in through here, the leg, nothing particular. I am taking some care to be conscious of scale and proportion in design, but I'm not being too scribbly, but it is very loose. It is more casual than other gesture, I suppose, if you will. So I've got what looks like now is the major components set into my composition, and you want to compare and contrast. How well have I composed within a relatively, accurate degree? You should not get bogged down with every detail, and again, you don't have to get bogged down with every single size change. This is for your analysis. So let's take the opacity down a little bit, and so we'll go in two layers. We'll go for a mid-tone all over and kind of show you what he's doing with the value. So again, ask yourself, hey, where is the compositional focal point? Well, it's around the figures, right? Their hair is dark, their skin is alabaster. It's very light, very aristocratic for that time. This is a wealthy patron, wealthy family, and so we'll push these values down to here, like so. And I'm keeping a very simple squinted vision. I am squinting my eye and just looking for a simple value pattern of light versus dark. I'm looking at, see how these darkest areas make just simple shapes right now. I'm not worrying about all the detail on the parrot type bird, but I'm mostly interested in how he's arranging his spatial design and then using light and dark pattern relationships to pull this composition out. Then I can let's take now the opacity, and let's go pretty much darker, and let's see what he's doing very simply here. So he's utilizing, again, I'll capture the hair against the skin in this big dramatic sweep of this cloth, the curtain here with the hair. Notice how dark and simple, there's no detail back here. He wants that to be a resting spot, a resting place for you to look very simply at, and then get on with the business of looking at what is the major point of the composition, which is the mother's head and her children surrounded by her. So all this darkness is used again as a resting, what I call a resting prop. And so if you're sprinting the entire time and you're not taking a rest, you'll gas out. So if we have too much detail, we won't see the focal point of our composition. So that just can go in dark, and a little dark in through there, and you get the idea. Notice I'm using a very blunt, non-detailed tip when I draw. So now I've got the composition laid out, and we've got the entire figuration of our forms laid in with our design. Okay, and so again, this whole idea of movement in the triangle in the beginning of the composition is, I think, key, because I want you to be able to see, hopefully to begin to see the big patterns, which is, whoops, we're still in black there. Oh, I guess, well, man, we should go to red. Okay, there we go. Is to be able to see this big jump, this big triangle. That's the most dominant organizational principle in that composition. And these become secondary. The head here, and then head here down. Okay. All right, let's go on to another. All right, so we have Ingres, which is a French neoclassical artist. Let's put this in full screen. Fit on screen so you can see that. And so let's analyze the big sweep of the composition before we get into a lot of detail. So we'll take it down a little bit in our pen nib, in our opacity, and let's take a look at what's happening in through here. So we have a young romantic couple, and let's analyze what they're doing. So the biggest sweep of the entire composition is both of them laying together, resting and relaxing, and it's this movement this way. So they're really moving down, right, this way, and then she's lounging across. He comes up with his knee and over and then downwards, and he's got this nice view of his elbow to give us a little variety in through here. So everything in the composition really sweeps what? Sweeps this way, sweeps this way, sweeps down and over that way. So I think I'll just leave this one for time, a more simple kind of diagrammatic kind of thing, that we can even make these even more abstract in looser here. So I'll go to a little bit more opacity. So let's take a look at this one where, again, the flow downward and through here, she moves over and out this way just slightly, kind of up and through there. And his elbow is very important as a relief to that rhythm of that flow, because what we really have once we start to look back here is kind of a one-point, picture diagram of an interior. So it's very shape-oriented, and we get this sort of this couch thing, this bed frame that they're laying on, which is very one-dimensional in terms of its perspective. It flows in through here, and of course down over where they're at the apex, in over and through here. So his figures in through here, her head's over through here, and down, over, and that's how simple these can be. These can be, what if you only had a minute or 2 minutes to analyze this? This is what these would look like. This is what these should look like. when you have, you know, very little time, 1 minute, 2 minute gestures of the entire very difficult, very challenging kind of painting. Compositionally, that's where it's placed. So if we analyze our placement, we look and see where the middle proportions of our figure are. Did we get it right? Well, okay, we push down and through here, right? And we push over. And what do you notice? That the focal point is way off center. It's way up into the top left corner. So LC for left corner, really pushed far up and through here. And that's what the intention was. And all this, look how much darker all this is in his composition than the figures, which again are pretty dark here. And so he sets everything up where we have a strong contrast. All this is still a darkness through here. So her leg comes down, and so they're really set off by a sea of darkness around them. And so if I, you know, again, this is meant to be very crude, and so we see compositionally what they're doing. And again, they are set off. Again, the most detailed, the most telling, you know, emotional expressions are right here in the left quadrant of the painting. All right, a couple more here. All right, so we have a very challenging composition by Rubens. We have multiple figures with lots of movement. So let's try to get the spirit of that in as simple terms as possible. So I'll start out again with the red, and we'll go down in pen nib. Take the opacity down quite a bit. Let's analyze this in terms of its drama. So we kind of move in the composition this way, right? And we have her in this area, which is our focal point. How do we know that? Well, we've got our greatest degree of contrast between this figure, right, and the silhouette of the other figure around her, which is mostly in shadow. Yeah, there's detail, but you know, she's mostly in the light, right? Her arm moves down in this direction, hand covering over her chest and through there. And so that's the greatest degree of contrast. So there's your focal point. So we move in this direction with our figures. This tends to move, everything tends to kind of flow in this direction. So we have her figure here. Now how can we get this? Can I get this in 2 minutes? We have our figure here. We have our main dominant figure behind. Then we have this other figure. He turns this figure, but he pushes his figure this way. So everything tends to still, look how the back leg tends to still flow in this direction, right? So we're moving back in this direction. Then the satyr here curves through, head curves through and down because he wants to push us this way a little bit, curve in through here, around. So Rubens will take you on a lot of different little Baroque journeys. Leg coming back in through here. So we curve in and around, and then we wrap through with this bottom area, this material in through. So we wrap around. We have the young child looking up. His arm wraps in through here. So thinking as a series of wraps and flows and directions. And so this arm moves in through here. We have a wrap around. In this area, we have the back head in through here of this figure. This wraps in through. I could cut this off a little bit. Right in through here. So we want to keep these sketchbooks, your diagrams, they can be very rough. This could be an underdrawing where you can get very tight later on top of it if you want to. Then we have the figure of the baby in through here. I want to get it in very quickly, roughly. Flow in through here of this looks like a princess figure. Back through with her gown and on over. And so this main flow takes us to be as simple as possible and as crude as possible and as designed as possible this direction. We come up through, right, in through here. We might turn and go in round, and then he brings us through here. Look at the whirlwind journey that Rubens gives us. We could come up, go back and through, back around this way and on over. This head, this arm leads us up through and back over to this head, which again, look where this head is pointing to, back in this direction and over and back down to our focal point, which is right in through here, and we can take that same journey again. So that's quite a bit of flow and quite a bit of dramatic movement. And this is the kind of things I would encourage you to look for in your compositions, are a diagrammatic sense of direction and movement and flow. All right, so let's take on Pontormo here, and let's look at what's going on in this direction. So we'll fit him in. So I've got this more half circle, half rotund composition that Pontormo is famous for. So let's take a look and see what he's done here in his composition. All right, so we have a movement, or almost a double focus, between the figure of the Virgin Mary up in through here, right? We see her coming down with her hand and arm. And this gets us to our other strong focal point, which is the image of Christ being taken down off the cross. And so we could start anywhere you want. I might start with him. And his body is limp. It's like noodles as he's being discharged from the torture of the cross down in this direction. And so Pontormo gives us that limp figure, but notice how he puts Christ lower than that of the living, of what we're assuming is the Virgin Mary suffering with the death of her child, her son. And so I will now sketch in, and I generally use the head as a kind of holding point, again, for our figures. And so we have the figure of Pontormo, his usage. Look how pink that skin is, by the way. It's really, really pastel-y. Very, very mannered, Venetian kind of mannerism. And so we have this figure kneeling and bending down in very expressive, altered proportions. This figure kneeling down in through here. And so I see this journey. Look at the curve that this back figure takes on. That curves with the legs here, curves through. And so they fit together in an arbitrary designed kind of way, where this leg of Christ moves down in this figure of this woman. Her robe tends to fit within that. Then we flow upwards, and she's taking on a position of sorrow with Mary in through here. Hand moves up, and notice how that also begins to move into this beautiful rhythm of this kind of curved movement flowing through here. So it's really all about this, isn't it? It's all about this versus this versus this versus that, and it takes you on these little curved journeys throughout. And of course, you can keep on going in that composition. All right, last one, we'll look here at Titian. So this one's a little bit easier to, I think, analyze. And of course, we'll take on some of the effect of the landscape too as well. So you're looking at these two figures that are in some relative confrontational aspect. And they, you know, when I analyze it, I look at this figure's movement, very dominant, very active, very almost aggressive, and this composition is split a little bit with this spear here. And so that takes me up here. It takes me up to their head, right? So we have this head here, figure here, coming on down. And then the cloth, loincloth of her skirt type in through here, right? So we have that. And then we have this male figure, which is a little bit larger, but lower than. So there's a kind of spear or flag holder in through here, and she's holding that. We have the secondary figure behind and lower, which is important. So there, which is the system of dominance. But then we have the figure here leaning over and through. So there's this movement through this way. But he brings us, Titian brings us back by bringing this leg back over through here, right, and down. So we have just through action of what we're doing with our composition, because we have a war scene here, a dead form in through here. But the main two figures, as they're interacting, are doing this. This curve comes down and over, back up. And of course, now we have this tree, which emphasizes the leaning quality. Notice it's not standing up. It continues to lean this way. Tree over here in this direction. The rest of it tends to push us in through here. So there's quite a bit of movement with what could be a very static scene. We have the horizon line here. So to wrap this up, we'll give it more opacity here. To wrap this up a little bit, you want to see this kind of flow. So we have this dominant flow this way, right, down and through, up and around and through here, split and through here, over and around. And so we have head, and this gets us up and over to the apex, and then we move, and again, another kind of triangle down this way. And of course, we have a head of this figure. And the lean is so important. This really gives it compositional movement. If it was straight up, it wouldn't. We have a lean here. We have a further lean out here with these kind of landscape elements that get us back in this direction, because he wants to take us and get us back here. Right. This foot goes in here because he wants to continue to make us flow in this direction to get us back to these figures, which gets us again back up to here, right, to the top. And then what we find along in our journey, right, in our tertiary readings are these actions in the water in through here, and then of course the detritus and the dead figures of war, etc., that are in this direction. So that gives you another reading, again, a kind of a movement, a diagonal movement and a flow, because artists will use diagonals, triangles, and flow all the time in their composition. All right, so we looked at quite a few artists there of mostly the Renaissance and the Baroque era to begin to help you use gesture and action as a way to look at composition, design creation, and the analysis of how these design elements are put together in a very simple abstract way that when they are fulfilled can be very complex, beautiful, extremely detailed, and again, very complex, obviously, compositions. Okay, so that wraps up how gesture and action can influence composition and design. So if you have any questions, certainly look me up, email me, or send your images to me, and I'll be happy to take a look, and we'll go from there. All right. We will see you then next time. Take care.